Hello and welcome to the Bitlemmas podcast. I'm Watson. I'm here with B Sovereign and Josh, and today is a book review of Digital Technology and Democratic Theory by Bernholz, Landemore, and Reich, and some others. But the point is not social media is good or bad. The point is that digital systems are now part of governance by default. They decide who can speak, what spreads, and what gets buried. In the next hour, we're going to review our normal four counterintuitive truths, which are number one, more participation can reduce deliberation quality. Number two, the public square is privately governed and often opaque. Number three, exclusion and silence can be political action. And then number four, democracy has an architecture and it can be redesigned. And then we'll end with some practical questions like where would you add accountability first? So now on to the thesis of the book. Digital systems are now part of governance by default. Democracy depends on participation, attention, and accountability. We'll keep revisiting these throughout the review. So, given those two, democratic theory should shape digital design and governance. We're going to dig into all of these, the four core themes of the book. Digital tech expands coordination and voice, but it also expands noise, manipulation, and gatekeeping. We're going to be digging deeply into all of these. A healthy public sphere needs truth, tracking, plus trust. Exclusion from the forums and silence are political facts, not glitches. That is actually probably going to receive some type of resistance from some people because it's quite counterintuitive. Fixes, so fixing any problems within digital democracy, it's going to have to include rules, incentives, and architecture fixes. All right, what is this book all about? An edited volume. It's got 10 chapters, multiple authors. So this is more of an academic read. What's the core question? How does digital tech reshape democratic ideals? Some of the topics, again, these are various essays, the public refusal. So that's refusing to and speech government. Also, we'll get into is news as infrastructure and the architecture of systems. These are some of the things that we're concerned with on this podcast. So now, the digital public sphere has two knobs. Aperture. So what does that mean? Who can publish and who can join a forum? We're going to revisit this often. Then you have the filter. What gets attention? What spreads? You can think of this also as some type of ranking. Sometimes filters are implemented through ranking, and we'll also dig more into that. Now, low cost open the aperture fast. What does that mean? When you now have digital capability to participate, digital forums, it's not expensive. You don't have to write an article for the local newspaper and get it admitted in order for you to have exposure. It doesn't cost anything now or it costs very little to participate in some type of what you think of as a public square. We're going to talk about the difference between an apparent public square versus a real one. So that's what the low costs are about. And then now, because you have a low cost to participate, filtering now becomes more powerful. Why? Because attention is now scarce. We're going to get into this multiple times, but attention now, because of the volume of content, is the filtering of the attention. That's going to be whoever has that filter is going to be the one with the power.
Yep, yep. And I think we're going to dive in later between how to do this in an appropriate way in decentralized systems because, I mean, in centralized systems, we see it all the time where it could end up with, shadow banning or people really getting their voice silenced on social media, not showing up in people's algorithms or to their followers. But we're going to dive into that later in the presentation here, but just wanted to give you all a heads up.
Yep. So now our four counterintuitive truths. Truth number one: more participation can reduce deliberation quality. Why is deliberation important? Because you need deliberation for true democracy from the author's point of view. Truth number two: the public square is privately governed. Uh, what you think of as a public square is privately governed, let's say. And how it's governed is opaque. You can't really see. We'll get into that. Number three: exclusion and silence can be political action. That one has a lot of pushback from various circles. And then truth number four: democracy has an architecture and we can redesign it. So, truth number one: more speech does not equal better democracy. So, near zero costs create what the authors call superabundance. What's superabundance? That's when the number of posts, videos, and claims are large. And then, because of that, it makes attention scarce. So, that enables also coordination. You have you have more you have a bigger or wider capability of people to talk to each other, but it also enables disinformation, or you can call it manipulation, and various other fragmentation is another thing. Fragmentation can happen without barriers. Basically, you get into an echo chamber and speak to other people of your own group only, or your only own beliefs, and you can fragment without having um, any type of algorithm that forces you to do it. But of course, that can also be accentuated. So quality depends on norms and trust, not just access. Meaning, you can put a forum out there, and we'll get into this on the model in a second. But you can put a forum out there and have open access. Everyone could be on there. But you can also, not just because of what you could call maybe chaos, everyone posting everything and attention becoming scarce, but also you can have active manipulation on the forum, which can reduce the quality. Also, scams, or I should say spam, and various other things.
Um, First, I want to say, um, Watson, a lot of your language, I'm going to piggyback off of something B Sovereign said on the main slide. And as well as the language you're using, Watson, as far as posts, spam, forums. Um, I think it's very important. Like, I'm not sure if a lot of people make the connection that speech in 2026 is essentially effectively 90% social media. It's the social platforms that, and like, I think this is, I want to bring up my commentary for every truth for these four is going to be about social media. And it's essentially like more participation can reduce deliberation quality. I mean, we see that every day. I don't care if you're on Twitter, if you're on Threads, if you're on X, if you're on Threads, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, doesn't matter. It may even pop up in your group me's or your WhatsApp groups. They can get massive. Or Telegram, right? Um, it gets noisy. It gets noisy. But I think that point about just that speech and how free how free it is really comes into play here. I want to hammer that home in truth number two, but I just wanted to like just point that out. Like free speech, we hear that a lot, and we think, for me, I think like, oh, Declaration of Independence. Oh yeah, we freedom of speech. But no, dude, it's supposed to, at some point, social media becomes a common good. I think that's the phrase. It's and so I think that's the platform we have these days. There may be private companies, but you have a responsibility at some point.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the beautiful thing about, social media in general is that you can get in there, with zero cost essentially, right? Like it costs you nothing to just spin up an account. But at the end of the day the old assumption is if everybody can be heard, right, it leads to better deliberation. But that only holds true if there is true deliberation happening on these platforms. So in practice, the internet has allowed us, to be more vocal with others. But I mean, you have to make sure that we have quality stuff being posted on there. So,
Mhm.
the result, what we have today is everyone can speak, but almost no one is heard, is essentially what
Mhm.
we have.
And I want to keep this conversation honest. Um, we're talking about humans. Humans may not be reality.
Yeah.
When you have bad actors who can, make their voices louder with bots and things like that,
Mhm.
um, that's reality. And so we can keep it about humans if we want, because just of like of integrity and your thinking of these things, it's important to consider these truths. But also, yeah, that near zero cost to create content. Yeah, zero cost to make thousands of accounts, and we see trends all the time. So let's also keep that in mind.
Yeah, that includes bots are part of that spam category. So,
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely,
so
absolutely.
this is definitely the trade-off. That is this is the problem. It's the back and forth. We could look at this model here in order to reason about it. We could talk about it some more. So you have, in the top left, you have, there's really four different, you could call it capabilities or primitives, was what I would call it. So filters, you could have a weak filter, you could have a strong filter. Aperture, you can have a gated aperture or an open aperture. Remember, aperture is who can post, right? So if you have an open aperture and a weak filter, then the noise wins. So everyone can post, and there is no rules. We're going to talk about what a filter is, but rules, ranking, that those types of things, or yeah, those types of things. Then the noise wins. So kind of what you're talking about, Josh. On the bottom left, you have gated and weak. What is gated aperture? That's when it's not open. Everyone can't post. So it's that type of community. But it's weak filter. So weak rules. That's when you have where elites can say whatever they want. The bottom right hand side, the gated and strong. What is that? The broadcast era, the MSNBC or old school, not MSNBC, NBC. Even before CNN. So go back to the 80s. NBC, ABC, very gated. But there was a strong filter. You could reason about it as um, only, you had Walter Cronkite, people who they were considered trusted journalists, these types of things, whether you feel like that wasn't true or that's true or not. And then the top right hand side, you have kind of reasoning from within the author's, I guess, perspective. You have open, everyone can post, and strong. So strong filtering, what would that be? I'd probably say something like what Josh was bringing up. So some type of filtering of bots out of there, kind of thing. But there's going to be some type of moderation. We're going to talk about the different types of moderation, who gets to moderate, and that's how you judge these forums. But we're going to get into that.
Mm-hmm. And before we move on, I want to say that, you know, democracy, indeed, it needs both participation and trustworthy filtering, but there is a huge issue of who creates the filter. Whoever controls the filter controls, and what people see, that is an issue or problem, right? That's hidden centralization if you have complete control over filters of what everyone else sees on the network.
All right. So now, the collective intelligence hypothesis. What is this? It's the belief, the hypothesis, that you can have better democracy if you have more inclusive deliberation, and that can outperform the older gated public forums, like what I was talking about, the 80s, the Walter Cronkites who gave everybody the information and the nightly news. That's the theory. But it relies on a condition. You have to have, like what B. Sovereign was saying earlier, genuine deliberation. And if you don't have that, then you're going to run into, all of the problems that Josh was talking about. We're still figuring out how to do that, and we're going to try to reason about that a little bit later. Now we got this trade-off. You have decentralization, like what B. Sovereign was saying. You have this decentralization, and you have centralization. So it's really a trade-off when you're thinking about and reasoning about who is it that controls the platforms. So if you have decentralization, it's viewed as chaos. So anybody can join, anyone can post, and we're saying no filters, so you can have bots, you can have whatever. What's the trade-off? If you can have a trade-off, you could call the Faustian bargain of digital technology or digital democracy. You give up your decentralized chaos for centralized safety, but when you do that, you're going to accept opaque filtering, opaque rules you cannot see, and then also private control. This is the bargain when you do that. Mm-hmm. So now you can allow for trolling, spam, all of this stuff that can actually make the deliberation useless. And so all of that, again, if you have decentralized chaos, oftentimes the trolling can happen, the spam can happen, all of these things, and it makes people want the centralized, the centralized safety. So that's this back and forth with this trade-off.
Yep. Centralized moderation and opaque filters. That right there is an issuer problem, right? So you're essentially trading one opaque gatekeeper for another when you are when you're looking at a centralized moderator.
Yeah. When you, let's say, and I think kind of getting what you're saying, if you're on one forum and you don't like the culture or the rules that are enforced on that forum, you don't like the issuer there. You don't like the person that has the claim on all the value for all of your posts, and they can boot you off or not. But then you can switch to another one, and now you're switching. You think now you feel like the problem is electing the right elite. We're going to talk about that some more in the coming slides.
I want to. I mean, and it's I think it's a good segue to the second truth. But staying on this slide, I want to point out, like, something I've noticed over the years is that a lot of people, just like social media, quote unquote social media, people think that it is, or assume that it's social. They see their friends, their family, their co-workers, and they're like, hey, yeah, you can post whatever you want. There's a little part missing, um, where essentially like we could talk about the economics of it, or we can take it from a lot of different angles. But I'll just say this: um, just I'll say it like this: just due to the very economics, if 100% of your followers saw everything that you posted, social media platforms would not be in business. They would be There's people with tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of followers. They would have better access than cable TV, than Netflix and any platform. This is huge numbers, and so um, sure that is appropriate for those huge influencers, but it also is applicable to the small guy with 100 followers, just because it's governed by the algorithm. And so, with that said, what you have to understand is that everything that you see is by design. Everything you see is curated. That's on Facebook, that's on Twitter, that's on X, that's on all of these. And so, once I feel like once you, I think it's a really important thing, and an important point to bring home, because um, we talk about like moderation. I feel like when I say moderation, most people don't think of Facebook or these popular platforms, but you're being moderated. There is a moderator. You don't get the freedom to just to post and all of your no. Every time you post, everyone doesn't see your post.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I want to say one more thing before we move on, because I feel like we're spending a lot of time on this one. But um, there's a lot of divisiveness, right? Specifically in Western countries right now, politically, right? And just remember that mainstream media outlets are able to say things, right, that everybody is not say for CNN and Fox. Most people don't watch both of them, right? But your algorithm is only going to show you things pertaining to one of these networks, because if you get both of them, you're going to be confused, right? And there will be chaos in your timeline. So just keep that in mind, is that there is that it if you keep it in that context, you can see very clearly that there is a lot of filtering that goes on behind the scenes.
I learned, and I know we are spending long on the truth one. I learned something from Watson a very long time ago, and I was young in my career, and he mentioned something called a forced choice. And yes, decentralization is definitely it's noisy for sure. Centralization is less noisy, but is there really deliberation when you are forced to only consider a couple of options?
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's good.
All right. Truth number two: the public square is privately governed. So platforms are private companies; they're not public institutions. And the moderation becomes the internal trust and safety governance. So this is internal to the private entity. So governance includes ranking and deprioritization. So this is what people mean if you've ever heard the phrase freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. So you can be shadow banned, you can be deranked. So you feel like your post is out there, but even when somebody is following you, maybe they don't see you, or even if they do and they repost, their uh, repost is not ranked high. So this is kind of, and then other people who probably shouldn't be or are not as popular are having their posts, claims, and videos boosted. So this is the new way to have manipulation of, let's say, again, the argument or what we're discussing is the public forum. So these are not public, they're apparent public squares. So everybody does everything. The president writes on Twitter or writes on something else, and then they can post it on Twitter. And then people learn policy, foreign policy from Twitter. So all of this matters because people are now learning about major political decisions from what they think is a public forum, but it's really a private entity that's enforcing the filtering, and it's opaque, so you can't see what it is that gets boosted and what doesn't. So that's the ranking.
All right. And that ranking is also, I just wanted to add a note, ranking is a form of censorship as well.
Yep. So now, private speech governance. Here's a pipeline, and I'm going to come back to this later, but the ways you can reason about how the private speech, so your speech that goes on what you think is a public forum, but it's not really, it's a private entity governing it. It goes through this pipeline. You have the rules of the private entity, how they enforce. So they're going to enforce their rules in whatever way, maybe arbitrarily, right? And then they can rank what we're talking about, getting boosted, not getting boosted. Doesn't really matter if you're an authority within your field and commenting on a subject, they can still downrank and shadow. And so they don't have the blowback. And then, of course, they control, through that ranking, the visibility. So the reach of what people have. Now we have free speech camps. So we touched a little bit on this already, but you have the millions, which is derived from John Stuart Mill, and the Rousseauians. So this is Jacques Rousseau. Now, John Stuart Mill, very influential in really Western democracy in general, our Constitution, so on and so forth. John Stuart Mill believed that in representative democracy, republics, and that elites were rightfully the ones who should craft, constitutions and rules and all of this stuff like that. The authors make a play on John Stuart Mill and say there's a camp. It's the opposite of John Stuart Mill. It's the millions. So like millions with an O, millions of people, the masses. So the millions believe in, when it comes to doing that, we're reasoning about filtering and restrictions now. So the millions believe, of course, that, okay, of course they believe in spam. They know that that's a real thing. They know about trolling. They know about all these other, things that can affect deliberation in the public square. The solution in the millions camp is to have more education for the citizens and citizen monitoring. And they believe in that over restrictions as far as who gets the filter and all of this. So they can believe in an open, completely open and no restrictions. They definitely prefer citizen monitoring. So you can think of something like very little restrictions, but something like threatening somebody with harm. The millions would probably side on the side of, okay, you could say that, but you're going to get prosecuted for saying that. So very few restrictions as far as access and all that, really none. Now the Rousseauians, Jacques Rousseau, another philosopher, is going to be on the other side, community self-rule. Remember, you could have multiple communities. So a community could decide what it is that they want to allow. And within that community, Jacques Rousseau says that they're probably going to have some type of protection from the vulnerable. And that protection of the vulnerable may include restrictions. So this would be the Rousseauian view of somehow having, again, what's at stake here? What's at stake isn't you posting cat videos. What's at stake here is that collective intelligence hypothesis. If you can have more people contribute and have real deliberation, then you can have a better informed citizenry, and you can have a better democracy than what J.S. Mill originally envisioned, where you're forced into a representative democracy. You have elites. This is what's at stake. These are the two sides are talking about.
Mhm.
So they both raise the same question: who sets the rules?
Who sets the rules? And I think that's a great question, because it sort of hints at I think it hints at a different problem. I'm not gonna go too far with it, but essentially, like, who sets the rules also implies that there's a difference, and people who are when you think about the rules and who set them, there's a rules, and I think that alludes to a greater. Well, you just go for it. Just pick it up, and I'll bring you back.
Yeah.
Well, then I
So
think with the whole thing of the rules, like the millions, they kind of setting no rules is a setting of the rules. So you can kind of are maybe thinking about that. And the thing on the Rousseauian side, what they care about is the tyranny of the majority. So the majority coming together and saying, we're the majority, and for instance, we don't want one group speaking, a whole group. We don't want you speaking. We're cutting you off, and we're the majority, so might makes right or whatever. The Rousseauians try to address that. But go ahead.
Look, I'll come in and I'll respond to you there, man. And honestly, it reminds me. I forget my original thought, but that reminds me of something that was kind of mind blowing. I think I'd already finished college, maybe, when I understood. Just being from the U.S. and thinking, Declaration of Independence and protection for the minority and all of that. And you have to remember, like, you have to think about it. Who's the minority? And the minority is and has always been the elite.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when we look at it today, it's the elite. It's what is that? The concentrated wealth. It's the guys on high. And so protections from the very start of this country, and I mean hundreds and thousands of years before, have always been for the minority, and the minority are the elite.
Yeah. I actually have a nice long note for this slide, and it's kind of a contrarian view, just a little bit. So, I mean, the book, we know it outlines these two camps between, the Millions believing in education and social monitoring over restrictions. The Rousseauians believe in community self-rule and protecting the vulnerable. And they disagree loudly about who should set the rules. But what neither camp questions is, I mean, they're both debating who should set the rules for a platform that you cannot leave. So to think about this more deeply, the Millions, they want better rules. The Rousseauians want community rules, but neither ask whether you should be stuck under anyone's rule with no way out. And that's not a flaw in their philosophy. It's a feature of just the architecture of the discussion and the platform in general. Platforms are designed so that your identity and your audience, your content, it's all theirs. You can't take it with you. So you debate who governs your speech. So the debate of who governs your speech only matters because leaving that platform is not an option. So when we're designing protocols, we call this a governance trap. When users can't exit, governance debates become arguments about who holds the leash, not whether there should be a leash at all. And the alternative isn't better moderation, it's portable identity and having a portable social graph, so you have the ability to take the audience and the following that you've built with you when you walk away. So if platforms had to compete for users who could actually leave, the governance question, all of this discussion, it answers itself.
Yeah. You're in the million camp. I don't know what you're saying. You're in the million camp. So central point of failure, server and filter. Many Civic platforms rely on a single server. This also can mean the a cluster of servers. So, for whoever's being pedantic out there. So if you want to say, when we say many Civic platforms, we're including what people are using pragmatically, effectively, as what they're thinking of as a public square. So let's go ahead and say Twitter. They rely on a single server, really a cluster, and of course they're going to have a central point of failure, central point of control. One compromise, so that can be someone is paid off, or it can be they're hacked, or what have you, can corrupt the process. So what could that mean? There can be spam added in there from the inside. People can be reduced, ranked, downranked, these types of things. It could be compromised. In this sense, it's most likely compromise of the actual controller, the issuer, like what B. Sovereign says. So trust in democracy becomes trust in infrastructure when we're talking about digital technology and democratic theory. You're going to have to trust in the infrastructure of whoever it is, whatever platform you're on. So that's what this, we're questioning this and critiquing this. So now, truth number 3. Exclusion and silence have meaning. I think that this receives a lot of pushback for people who believe in electoral politics. So people who have silence or don't do what we think of in the United States, we think of electoral politics as your participation in democracy and governance. And then people who are silent or who don't vote or what have you, there's no meaning to that. Well, this is a pushback on that and other types of participation. So exclusion is often structural. So we're talking here about forums. Exclusion is often structural injustice. So you are not able to participate in the public forum. That would be morally wrong. Why? Because we'll talk about this as far as external exclusion and internal exclusion. But when you are excluded from a forum, where in that forum there's decisions that are being made that affect you, that affect problems that affect you, that's when it's a structural injustice. If there's nothing being discussed in there that has binding decision-making power over you, then it's not. This is where the rubber meets the road. Public forums, and you're excluded. Remember, you can be excluded in multiple ways. There's external and internal. We're going to talk about that. So, but exclusion can also be refused. You can refuse. You can make an informed decision. You can refuse to be a part of that forum. Why? Because on that forum, they punish or police or exploit people, and you don't want to be a part of that. So you decide not to participate in that forum. So the people, for instance, for Twitter, there's people who don't participate in Twitter because they believe that people are punished on there or policed in ways that they don't like. Also, same thing with Facebook or other ones. Fixing access, so fixing who can get onto the forum, it doesn't end what's called internal exclusion. We're going to talk about this next slide, but internal exclusion is when you are formally part of the forum, you're on there, but like what we've been bringing up before, you are, because of the rules of the forum or the culture of the forum, you're unwelcome and silenced. So it now becomes part of the rules or part of the culture, either one. So this is a higher level, a way of reasoning about the ranking and so on and so forth. That's an internal exclusion from what the authors are talking about. So silence, when you're reasoning about these systems and you're trying to critique these systems, silence can be protest, risk, or enforced quiet, people excluded, right? So the risk, meaning someone's looking, why they're silent is because they think it's too risky to participate, which goes back to the cultural. So
Yeah, yeah. And before we dive more into this truth, I kind of want to give a little bit of perspective with my research that I've done here. So I want to first throw out this number, which it should change the way that we look at this going forward. But 85% of the world's population, about 6.7 billion people, live in what we call as the global south. They account for 39% of global GDP. They're the majority of humanity, and they're already excluded on most digital platforms by geography, by language, by infrastructure, by the simple fact that these platforms weren't built with them in mind. So when I say the 85%, this is who I'm going to be referring to from here forward. So now, this truth says that exclusion isn't just a bug, it's a political fact. And it takes three forms. You have participants, people with a visible voice. You have the excluded, people who are blocked from access entirely. And then you have the refusers, people who could participate but choose not to. So silence can mean fear, protest, or I'm not heard. But digital silence can be civil disobedience. All three are democratic data. And if you look at the 85% through this perspective, something important becomes clear. They're not just excluded, but many of them have learned to refuse systems that don't serve them. And that refusal isn't ignorance, it's experience. So this is why this matters for how we build. We're not building, for the global south as a charity case, but we are building with the global south in mind, because that 85% of the population, the global population, is a canary in the coal mine. They have been through these experiences already. They are going through them right now. Things such as internet shutdowns, capital controls, money flowing in and out, asset freezes. These are all things that will happen to that 15% of the global population, meaning the Western nations. We're talking EU, the US, tomorrow, right? These things are happening right now. And a lot of people may not see that. So if you design for the worst case conditions that the 85% already live under, you're designing a system that is bulletproof and that can go into the future for the 15%.
all right. So, and that's going to be a lot of what we're getting into on some of these next slides. Access is not enough. We already talked about external exclusion. You're kept out of the forum. Internal exclusion. You're included, but you're unwelcome and silenced. So you need to design these systems, and you need to design who can really participate. We talked about what B. Sovereign was bringing up. Silence can be democratic data, that fear, protest, and I'm not heard. So silence is political action, oftentimes. And you have to be able to reason about all of these things in order to critique any of these public forums. That's the point of what we're trying to get at and what the authors are getting at. So whenever you are trying to critique some kind of, I'm just going to keep saying, there's a public forum, and when someone says a public forum, immediately they say, "Well, I'm on Twitter. That's not a public forum." Well, it is. It's an apparent public forum, and it's what the authors are addressing. So, whenever you're trying to critique some place where people are going to deliberate decisions that affect them, you're going to have to address three, not just one, but three groups: participants, the excluded, and the refusers, the people who make an informed decision not to participate oftentimes, right? So the democratic design, remember, we're reasoning about how you design digital technology so that it can facilitate democracy. You're going to have to account for all three. Now, truth number 4, democracy has an architecture. What does this mean? So, of course, software and business models can govern by default. And if your software and your business model is to produce, it produces a apparent public forum, you are in the business of governing because of the rules that you enforce in your rating and so on, your ranking. So democratic norms must be designed into systems, given that now these apparent public forums are shaping democracy. Now, accountability. So, opaque rules, who is it that can change things, how you hold them accountable. That is now the new frontier. That's now what you have to reason about with these systems.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we're looking at this democracy stack that we're about to go into on the next slide, is that the next slide? Just to be
Yep.
sure here. Yeah. So, I mean, this I would call this a choke point framework, because the minute that one of these layers here are destroyed, everything on top of it collapses. So, I mean, we really have to take time to truly think about, you know, what the infrastructure is, who has, you know, the ability to get in with identity and access, and what people are allowed to say. So yeah, every layer, I just wanted to iterate, like, every layer here is a control surface, essentially.
That's right. Every layer here is a control surface, and the layers above it, it makes it more opaque, and you can break anything above it. So when we're reasoning about what democracy is, again, digital technology and democratic theory. Democratic theory before digital technology, it was okay, in the public forums, you had informed citizens, right? Making decisions, really, if you're in a republic, about who to elect, but you're trying to make informed decisions about what they care about and what their policy is. So you need a public forum for that. All of this is part of democratic theory, period, the outside of digital democracy. Now, with the digital technology, you have public forums that are now governed by more opaque rules. It isn't who's going and speaking in a public square, and it isn't the old gated um, forums, which is the major news networks from the 80s and previous. Now we have this private entities, or more, so you could say the I could say, you could say that the rules were somewhat opaque in the old gated, but now it's, again, freedom of speech. People can post, but not freedom of reach. And now, of course, the old gated was one way. Now you have two way. So you have to address all of these in the stack when you're reasoning about democracy, no matter what. So this problem is going to continue to come up if you're going to think about the whole democratic ideals. If you don't care about democratic ideals, then you're probably not going to worry about the stack.
Mhm. And I don't think we've really mentioned much of the what the price framework is, but we've developed what we call the pre-mine, roadmap, issuer, censorship, and exit. It's a framework of those 5 prongs here, and I kind of want to look at this from that perspective for a second, right? So on the infrastructure layer, we can see, you know, we can ask, is it censorable? Can a state or a platform shut it down? On the identity layer, is there an issuer? Can participation be revoked? Right? Speech, is there a roadmap dependency? Right? Is it like, will we decentralize later? Can somebody just, you know, arbitrarily, if they are the owner of this platform, can they just do whatever they want with it without a vote from everybody else? Filtering, who controls the ranking? right? Is it the user or the platform itself using, any type of algorithm that they may have or filters that they put into, say for example, with Meta or Google, they decide that, they don't want this type of content to be shown in their searches or, just on their social, Instagram or Facebook, what have you. And is there an exit story? Can you fork this conversation? Can you take your audience with you? Can you leave with what you came with or what you've developed while you were there? So the audit is the process. Is it legible or contestable? Every layer should pass the price model. If it doesn't, you've built a choke point in some way, shape, or fashion. It's not truly a public square.
All right. Thanks for that. Let's go into the open democracy versus bottlenecks. So what the authors are saying, what is a bottleneck? What is this civic bottleneck? It's when individuals, so people are part of some type of democracy, have plenty of ideas, right? So the citizens' ideas. But what ends up happening is they pile up and then they die because the pathway towards the decision making is blocked by the elites and institutions. And then the way to manipulate that now is through the digital tools. So it can widen inputs, but only if the decision makers, so that's the elites and institutions, only if they allow it, only if they want to, right? So now you can have voice. Again, you can have freedom of speech without freedom of reach. And so that's what this open democracy versus the bottlenecks. The theory is citizens need to be informed, and when they're informed in a democracy, when you have informed citizens deliberating, you have lots and lots of good ideas, and that's where all the good ideas come from. So this actually causes harm. News is democratic infrastructure. So again, democracy needs informed citizens. Now, the book takes a position that if you're a hardcore, say, libertarian, maybe you don't. Like if you believe everything should be privatized, you probably won't like this position. But information is a public good, is what the position that the book authors take. And since you need information for informed citizenry, for democracy to happen, then it's going to be at the highest level of what you want to prioritize in a democracy, the information. Now, why is this an issue? Why do they call it a public? They're contrasting that with what markets can do, saying that markets would be private goods. When people say, oh, well, just allow the market to decide for the information. The position of the authors is that a free market actually underproduces. A free market underproduces objective, independent, not I want to say objective, independent ideas. So that's why they're saying it should be a public good. It shouldn't be controlled by the private. So this back and forth, again, we're reasoning about private, we're having apparent public squares that are controlled by private. This decision of what's a public good or not, when you're in a democracy, again, information has to be considered a public good in order to have because of markets underperforming, let's say. If you believe that markets don't underperform as far as information, again, if you were to say that, you could say, okay, who it is that allows for public information, and they're private. You say New York Times, let's say, for instance, or another group. You have the advertising model, right? And this is in the manufacturing consent book, Noam Chomsky classic. You have the advertising model that has influence regardless of which side you're thinking. If you're thinking of right and left, the advertising model has a outsized influence on what gets put into a market. You could say, I don't want to read New York Times. I want to read something else. You still have this. You have a free market providing the information, but because it's being brought to you through some type of, it's being influenced by this advertising model, then you have a problem. That's where I think that the authors are coming from. So these funding models now, of course, you can create new gatekeepers if you have a private entity that's controlling the rules and all that. So again, the question is, who controls the gatekeeping?
And that's a choke point.
Yeah. So the discussion to contemplate before we get into our individual views of or ways of critiquing what's in the book, the content of the book. You can contemplate some of these questions. Which knob matters the most right now? The aperture, so who can post? The filter, how the rules get applied. Who is it that can? How attention gets distributed. Let's say, what should be governed publicly versus privately? I just talked about this. What does it mean to be publicly governed versus private? When is refusal legitimate? So refusing to participate. And what would it signal? We talked about that, but you may have different views. Many people they believe that when someone refuses to participate in a forum or some other type of political action, that's not a signal. They're just being almost to the point of being immoral. If you're a part of a democracy and you refuse to participate in whatever the tools are that are made available to you, then you are not performing your civic duty. Where would you add accountability first in any system that has some kind of filtering at all? So these are different things that you can bring up as far as questions to try to reason about the content. So now, this is a critique for builders. How, and this is coming from the standpoint of someone who is in software that's used to modeling domains. And I'm lifting this from two different very influential books. One is the Structured Interpretation of Computer Programming Languages, and the other one is Timeless Way of Building. Both of these are immensely influential on software in general and architecture. I don't really like the word architecture, but architecture. So what do we mean here? I'm gonna try to go through this somewhat quickly. But you have a concept within the structured interpretation of computer programming languages. You have a way of critiquing language. And within a timeless way of building, this is Christopher Alexander, who is not in software, actually. He's in traditional architecture of buildings and cities, so on and so forth. Both of them talk about language as a way of facilitating bottom-up design decisions. So someone who could call themselves an architect or a designer, their job isn't to top down within these views. It isn't to be top down designing and making decisions. It's actually to create a new language, and you solve the problem. And when within Christopher Alexander's view, you solve the problem through facilitating groups of people, but you create the language. So now applying this to the nomenclature, the language within digital technology and democratic theory, you can try to have a critique of how you would build things for this problem space. So what does all that mean? Quickly, you have structure interpretation of computer programs. They have three ways of critiquing language. Whenever you go, so they were using now programming languages, but it's really for any language. So you have primitives. So these fundamental, you can think of them as words, but they're the words within a domain that are important. Then you have combination or the method of composition, how you compose. If you can think about this in regular language as grammar, how you can compose, where you can put something, where you can't put anything. Then you have fundamental methods of abstraction. These are this would be kind of the workhorse. These are the things that you instantiate or exemplify when you're trying to solve the problem. And I'm going to try to get into some examples here. But so now primitives within this domain, within the domain of digital technology and democratic theory. You have aperture, for example. We use the term aperture. Who can join? You have filter. What spreads? When you are going to be designing systems, those should be first-class citizens in the language you develop. That's going to be represented in the software. Then you have combination, methods of composition. So we had open, remember? Open and closed apertures. You also had weak and strong filters. You're composing those. You can compose open and close with the aperture. You can compose weak and strong filter. That's composition, right? Open and filter don't go together. Open and aperture go together. So now you have these filters and you have the ways that they can be composed. Then you have abstraction. We talked about the pipeline stack. So there's going to be, if you're designing some type of system, there's going to be rules that go with the system, even if it's decentralized. Whoever has designed the system, they're making rules for how it's going to be decentralized. And so you have a boundary there. How you reason about that. So we go back to that pipeline stack. You have who can access, the filters, the speech, what's allowed and what's not allowed. These types of things, you're reasoning about them and allowing them. I'll say right now, you can have an opt-in filtering system or someone like for Google. You can have it to where, of course, you have the underlying rules when you're searching, but you can also opt in to a safe filter. You can do that, and you won't see things that are considered unsafe by Google. Or you can turn it off. That would be opt-in. You can also be a part of a community, right? And so that would be open. You could be a part of a community that automatically filters, and you can't do anything about it, but you trust their filtering. That would be two things for using this abstraction. And now, again, we're talking about the implications of this is public forums where you're having debates and other things, or deliberation. The idea of this, to wrap it up, when you're trying to develop software for a domain, could be education, could be accounting. Here we're talking about digital technology and democratic theory. So we're talking about forums, social media, these types of things. You need to create a ubiquitous language. You have the stakeholders, the people who aren't technical, and they're going to be using words. You could be talking to a political scientist who understands. These people are political science writing this book. They understand aperture, filter, all these other things, and all of this, democracy and all the implications of democracy. You want to use the same language that they're using in the code. And then now you can leverage their expertise inside of the code, so you're not talking past each other. So ranking, moderation, logs, all these other things. So that is what I fear. Now we have Be Sovereign.
All right. So
yep.
For his, we're going to talk about the choke point here at filtering and discovery. That's really where this book, it lies in the strength is basically filtering who gets to speak and who doesn't. So, when we were looking back at the stack earlier, the democracy stack, above that lies the speech and the speech and what was that? I'm sorry.
The democracy stack, if I go by memory, here it is, right here.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, speech and association, identity and access, and infrastructure. Those are all things that sit on top of the filtering and discovery. So we can go back to that slide now. So for filtering and discovery, the choke points here, as we've discussed, are the ranking algorithms and shadow banning, right? Those things silence people. They don't have the ability to be heard, right? And who is responsible for that choke point? Who creates it? That would be the algorithm designers. Whether they're doing that purposefully or not, it is a form of censorship, which then limits the visibility and reach. And typically the trap goes is, I mean, if you have an application with open aperture, anybody can get in, then there's a bunch of noise. And then everybody's like, oh, no, I don't want to hear from this person. This person has opposing views of mine. And then it becomes the demand for moderation, right? And then that's when the algorithm developers, they design these filters. It's an opaque filter, but then it leads down to captive participation. So in order to avoid that, you would want to have user selectable ranking, as Watson had said, where the user can go in and say, like, this is what I want to see, or this is what I don't want to see. And you can also have separate storage from filtering. So by anything that you're putting up, it should not just be automatically filtered, right? That stuff should be free and open to all, but then the person, the individual themselves can choose how they want to govern themselves. And so we can think of, if we're building, say, a social protocol, for example, you want to avoid mandatory hosting or centralized identity. There's in lieu of that, what you could do instead is have self-hosted instances, right? These are kind of viable, but I mean, the cost comes at technical setup and audience fragmentation, right? It's not going to be very smooth to work around, and you're going to have some server administration skills and the ability to moderate them appropriately. And as for having a central, you want to avoid the centralized identity. One thing that you could do there is by being protocol based, right? By using a protocol like Nostr, where you have keys. Anybody can get a key, and it is the best that anybody has to do is they have to learn how to manage their keys amongst those networks. And there is a slight bit of a learning curve for learning how to use Nostr, but I mean, it can be used by just about anyone with a phone or a computer and access to the internet. So in that term, you would adopt multi-operator or user keys and verify. I mean, can people, the 85%, would they be able to use this application without friction, right? If you're building governance tools, you want to avoid single server voting and no appeals. You want to adopt verifiable voting and contestable outcomes, right? Verify can users audit results without trusting the operator. So we're taking things away from the infrastructure that it's sitting on, and we're leaving it to the people. And my final one here is if you're building a content platform, right? You want to avoid platform ranking and shadow banning. What we've said here with the algorithm designers, we want to adopt user selectable filters and transparent criteria, and verify that users can see why the content was deprioritized, and it wasn't just by the issuer or the platform owner doing it.
All right. Now, so we went through software craftsmanship, and then we had a critique of that with choke points, just focusing on everywhere where someone could exploit or scam or do some type of control that they don't really deserve in the system. So with Be Sovereign, focusing on that. Now we have builder usability, and we have Josh that's going to be talking, and he's more concerned with building things that someone would want to use as a builder, that someone would want to interface with.
Absolutely. Appreciate that, Watson. Just following that up, like, I mean, you've kind of laid the stage. Who builds the alternative? We've talked about centralized infrastructures. Um, who builds it? Um, we have to think about consider the pipeline, the stack, and the choke point, as the sovereign alluded to, and it's not the platforms, it's not the regulators, but the builders who are gonna like solve the problem. If you're a part of our like line of thought here, um, they're gonna be building decentralized tools for regular citizens, not just people who own the infrastructure. It's about participating, organizing, and refusing the you know just what's handed to you. I want to start by talking about the build stack. So we've got 5 layers here. Um, the With that considered, the needs, the simplicity, validation, adoption, and auditability. These aren't just steps; these are tensions. Essentially, like we need all of these all at once in order to achieve the decentralization um, that needs to happen. If you get one wrong, you're just rebuilding the choke point that you're meant to dissolve. So let's walk through it. Um, Starting with the first needs, like whose needs? Whartley saying you have to be honest about who you're actually serving. We've got three populations here. You've got the participants, you've got the excluded group, and you have the refusers. Um, the participants are already showing up. The excluded can't get in, and the refusers won't, probably because political reasons or whatever dogma they adopt. Um, but unless you actually try to at least attempt to address everyone, all three populations' needs, you're just renovating the room, like for loud people who are already in there. I'm kind of focusing on the participants there. If you don't like, we have to like go and try to get that excluded crowd, and also those people who are refusing, who just and honestly, from my perspective, those refusers may just lack information. From it could be from what do we like to say? All the popular words these days. Fake news. It could be deception. It could be misinformation. Whatever. A lot of those are loaded phrases, but they could honestly just not know any better. And then we can jump to simplicity. So, um, complexity is actually regressive. Like Segal in the book, I mean, he probably got this from Steve Jobs. He says, clear defaults are the way to go. We need fewer exceptions. Exceptions, every exception is a tax on participation. Essentially, how I like to think about it is that like fluent people or you know software engineers or just people who like to tinker, they'll do it easily every time. That comes second nature to them. Everyone else takes a hike. They're not gonna mess around. If it's hard, if it's confusing, if it requires them to think, if it's not a good UI UX, they're not gonna play around. I gotta stick around. And so like simplicity is key. Complexity is how you actually kind of accidentally rebuild the gate that you were trying to shut down. You're just going to lead them back to the centralized infrastructures. Um, our next one is validation. Um, Something that happens a lot is that first, I mean, what's validation? You build it, you measure it, you learn from it. Um, I think a constant problem that happens a lot is that people think that like just because it's a good cause or their hearts are in a good place that you know the solution is going to work out. You know, people with that like civic tech loves to skip that layer. I think that's like a term, and we know what the road to hell was paved with. You cannot skip this step. You have to. You just can't, man. You have build, you have to measure, you have to learn. You have good intentions, but you just can't do that. Um, like something that you could use to measure is like, did anyone who was excluded actually move to participate? And I'm not say that anyone, but like, did any good measure of excluded people move to participating? Like, did you like convert people, or did you just ship it without like, verifying? Like with a if you build it, they will come mentality. We all saw the movie; it was a great movie, but you have to put the stuff into practice. The next layer is adoption, protocol versus public. So power users, again, they adopt anything. If you're like I don't know, quote unquote critical thinker, an engineer, a tinkerer, you're gonna adopt stuff. You're just gonna go and do your thing. But it's not about that group of people, it's about the masses. If the masses don't adopt stuff, change never comes. It's not, I don't find a passion in these things for like a small group of people who are just tinkerers and have good. I don't like echo chambers. I like to get out there in the wild, and I like my passion comes from like getting the masses on board with this thing. Um, and that's the very definition of adoption, in my opinion. Um, if it doesn't adopt decentralized products, they quietly die. They're loved by the early adopters, but they're invisible to everyone else. I can name several. I'm not going to name drop, but we've heard of them. A protocol only applies to power users. It's a private club, but when adoption happens, that's when it's available to the public. Whether it's open source or not, if no one can use it and adopt it, it's still private. Um, and from there, we're gonna go to auditability. Um, it's honestly the foundation. Like Watson mentioned several times before, it's about the aperture, it's the filter, it's the pipeline. All of that is necessary to be open for inspection. You need logs. You need the ability to appeal. You need the ability to export it if you want. You need your whole social profile. It needs to be open for people. Um, one test is, I mean, be sovereign. You mentioned it earlier. Can users leave with their identity, audience, and data? From day one, it has to be available. Otherwise, a lot of people, and it's actually a common phrase. I've seen many startups these days say, "Oh, your data." Big name people, I drop LinkedIn. They say it. Your data is available to you. There's a few startups that say it. Oh yeah, you can get it. You can export your data, but if you can't take it anywhere, is it? What use is it? Oh, you can see everything that we've captured. You can't use it anywhere else. You can't take it. So what's the use of it? Um, I may be treading on another conversation, but your data needs to be auditable at the very least. I'll save the whole where can you take it. Honestly, I'm kind of alluding to Nostr that B Sovereign was mentioning, but still, it needs to be usable. At the bottom of the slide, we can read. If a layer leaks complexity, builders rebuild the choke point they meant to dissolve. Um, Essentially, like the whole point is that concentrated wealth owns infrastructure of public life, but you don't break that by accident. You build for it every layer and you do it on purpose. That's the work. That's what we got to do. Um, I think we're like summing it up here. I'm gonna hand it back to Watson, but honestly, like as we said before, democracy has an architecture, and architecture has builders. These like layers that we've just talked about. This is what has to all coincide, and we have to. This is what we have to bring together. If you're building, build every layer like someone is watching, because every layer is. That's what I've got.
Yeah. All right. A quick practical checklist. Who can participate? when you're critiquing, again, to reiterate, of these architectures, these systems, and during the system design of the different, whether they're private, whether they're open source, even, even just because it's open doesn't mean that it doesn't have choke points, so on and so forth. Who can participate? The aperture. How is attention allocated? There's filters. Who sets the rules? The governance. How do you appeal and audit? Right. So if you got kicked off, how do you appeal? That's accountability. And who's missing or silent and why? Here we got our conclusion. Digital tech expands coordination and gatekeeping, both. So you got two sides. You can have a problem there. Democracy depends on participation, filtering, and accountability. Those are really three big primitives that you should probably take away from the book. And the work, design systems that are legible and contestable.
All right. And to wrap this up, I do want to leave us with the one model, one story, and one action. So the one model is this, is the aperture filter stack framework. Every digital system has an aperture who can participate, a filter, how attention is allocated, a governance layer who sets the rules, and an accountability layer is how to appeal and audit. Last but not least, a silence layer, who is missing and why. You evaluate a system by mapping these 5 choke points and asking the exit question, can users leave with their identity, their audience, and data without permission from any issuer? If the answer is no, you've built a captive participation, not sovereignty. So the one story is the hidden centralization of governance. We've built a public square owned by private companies with opaque ranking and no appeal. We've confused access with voice and voice with influence. The architecture of the internet has created new gatekeepers, but we've refused to call them what they truly are, and that is issuers. So this matters most to the 85%, as I spoke about earlier, right? And when we think about the 85%, these are people, these are countries such as, Nigeria. We can think of Laos, Burma. We can think of Venezuela. All of these are the global south, right? They are the canaries in the coal mine. What they need today, the 15% will need tomorrow. So the one action for everyone listening, tailored, we're going to tailor this specifically to the devs today. If you're here to build the tools for the new world, your action is to map your own project against the democracy stack and the price framework, which we've discussed earlier, with pre-mine, roadmap, issuer, censorship, and exits. Where are the opaque layers? Where's the issuer? Where's the central point of failure? Have you designed for refusers and the excluded, or just for participants? For every layer, ask, is this censorable? Is there an issuer? Is there an exit story? If you're building for the 85%, these aren't theoretical questions. They're the difference between a tool that empowers and a tool that captures. Build for the canaries, build for sovereignty.
All right. And companion links for this episode are in the show notes. If you have any feedback, leave it in the comments. Don't forget to check out bitlemmas.com for more information and historical episodes. Thanks for hanging with us.
See y'all next week.